Part 1. 1. Captured in a bottle. The experiment of Leyden was a craze that was universal everywhere. When people would ask you if you had experienced its effects. The year was 1746. The place, any city in England, France, Germany, Holland, Italy. A few years later, America. Like a child prodigy making his debut, electricity had arrived and the whole Western world turned out to hear his performance. His midwives, Kleist, Kunaus, Allemande, and Muschenbroek, warned that they had helped give birth to an enfant terrible, whose shocks could take away your breath, boil your blood, paralyze you. The public should have listened, been more cautious. But of course, the colorful reports of those scientists only encouraged the crowds. Peter van Muschenbroek, professor of physics at the University of Leiden, had been using his usual friction machine. It was a glass globe that he spun rapidly on its axis while he rubbed it with his hands to produce the electric fluid. What we know today as static electricity. Hanging from the ceiling by silk cords was an iron gun barrel almost touching the globe. It was called the prime conductor and was normally used to draw sparks of static electricity from the rubbed, rotating glass sphere. But electricity in those early days was of limited use because it always had to be produced on the spot and there was no way to store it. So Muschenbroek and his associates designed an ingenious experiment, an experiment that changed the world forever. They attached a wire to the other end of the prime conductor and inserted it in a small glass bottle partly filled with water. They wanted to see if the electric fluid could be stored in a jar, and the attempt succeeded beyond their wildest expectations. I am going to tell you about a new but terrible experiment, Muschenbroek wrote to a friend in Paris, which I advise you never to try yourself, nor would I, who have experienced it and survived by the grace of God, do it again for all the kingdom of France. He held the bottle in his right hand, and with the other hand he tried to draw sparks from the gun barrel. Suddenly my right hand was hit with such force that my whole body shook as though struck by lightning. The glass, although thin, did not break, and my hand was not knocked away, but my arm and whole body were affected more terribly than I can express. In a word, I thought I was done for. His companion and inventor, biologist Nicolas Sebastian Allemande, when he tried the experiment, felt a prodigious blow. I was so stunned, he said, that I could not breathe for some moments. The pain along his right arm was so intense that he feared permanent injury. But only half the message registered with the public. The fact that people could be temporarily or, as we will see, permanently injured or even killed by these experiments became lost in the general excitement that followed. Not only lost, but soon ridiculed, disbelieved, and forgotten. Then, as now, it was not socially acceptable to say that electricity was dangerous. Just 2 decades later, Joseph Priestley, the English scientist who is famous for his discovery of oxygen, wrote his History and Present State of Electricity, in which he mocked the cowardly professor Muschenbroek and the exaggerated accounts of the first experiments. Its inventors were not the only ones who tried to warn the public. Johann Heinrich Winkler, professor of Greek and Latin at Leipzig, Germany, tried the experiment as soon as he heard about it. I found great convulsions in my body, he wrote to a friend in London. It put my blood into a great agitation, so that I was afraid of an ardent fever and was obliged to use refrigerating medicines. I felt a heaviness in my head, as if I had a stone lying upon it. It gave me twice a bleeding at my nose, to which I am not inclined. My wife, who had only received the electrical flash twice, found herself so weak after it that she could hardly walk. A week after she received only once the electrical flash, a few minutes after it she bled at the nose. From the experiences, Winkler took away the lesson that electricity was not to be inflicted upon the living, and so he converted his machine into a great beacon of warning. I read in the newspapers from Berlin, he wrote, that they had tried these electrical flashes upon a bird and had made it suffer great pain thereby. I did not repeat this experiment, for I think it wrong to give such pain to living creatures. He therefore wrapped an iron chain around the bottle, leading to a piece of metal underneath the gun barrel. When then the electrification is made, he continued, the sparks that fly from the pipe upon the metal are so large and so strong that they can be seen even in the daytime and heard at the distance of 50 yards. They represent a beam of lightning of a clear and compact line of fire that they give a sound that frightens the people that hear it. The general public did not react as he planned, however. After reading reports like Muschenbroek's in the Proceedings of France's Royal Academy of Science and his own in the Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society of London, eager men and women by the thousands all over Europe lined up to give themselves the pleasure of electricity. Abidine Antoinollet, a theologian turned physicist, introduced the magic of the Leyden jar into France. He tried to satisfy the insatiable demands of the public by electrifying tens, hundreds of people at once, having them take each other by hand so as to form a human chain, arranged in a large circle with the two ends close together. He would place himself at one of the ends, while the other person, who represented the last link, took hold of the bottle. Suddenly there learned about touching with his hand the metal wire inserted in the flask would complete the circuit, and immediately the shock would be felt simultaneously by the whole line. Electricity has become a social affair. The world was possessed, as some observers called it, by electromania. The fact that Noëllet had electrocuted several fish and a sparrow with the same equipment did not deter the crowds in the least. At Versailles, in the presence of the king, he electrified a company of 240 soldiers of the French Guard, holding each other by the hands. He electrified a community of monks at the Carthusian monastery in Paris, stretched out in a circle more than a mile around, each connected to his neighbors by iron wires. The experience became so popular that the public began to complain of not being able to give themselves the pleasure of an electric shock without having to wait in line or consult a physician. A demand was created for portable apparatus that everyone could purchase for a reasonable price and enjoy at their leisure, and so the Ingenhouse bottle was invented. Enclosed in an elegant-looking case, It was a small leaden jar joined to a vanished silk ribbon, and a rabbit skin with which to rub the varnish and change the jar. Electric canes were sold, prized for all pocketbooks. These were Leyden's jars, cleverly disguised as walking canes, which you could charge surreptitiously and trick unsuspecting friends and acquaintances into touching. Then there was the electric kiss, a form of recreation that even preceded the invention of the Leyen jar but became much more exciting afterwards. Psychologist Albert von Haller at the University of Göttingen declared incredulously that such parlor games had taken the place of quadrille. Could one believe, he wrote, that a lady's finger, that her whalebone petticoat should send forth flashes of true lightning, and that such charming lips could set on fire a house? She was an angel, wrote German physicist George Matthias Bose, with white swan neck and blood-crowned breasts, who steals your heart with a single glance, but whom you approach at your peril. He called her Venus Elettrificata in a poem published in Latin, French, and German that became famous throughout Europe. If a mortal only touches her hand, of such a god-child, even only her dress, the sparks burn the same through all of one's limbs. As painful as it is, he seeks it again. Even Benjamin Franklin felt compelled to give instructions. Let A and B stand on wax, or A on wax and B on the floor. Give one of them the electricite fill in hand. Let the other take hold of the wire. There will be a small spark, but when their lips approach, they will be struck and shocked. Wealthy ladies hosted such entertainment in their homes. They hired instrument makers to craft large, ornate electrical machines that they displayed like pianos. People of more moderate means bought off-the-shelf models that were available in an assortment of sizes, styles, and prices. Aside from entertainment, electricity, assumed to be related to or identical with the life force, was used primarily for its medical effects. Both electrical machines and Leyden jars found their way into hospitals and into the offices of doctors wanting to keep up with the times. An even greater number of electricians who were not medically trained set up office and began treating patients. One reads of medical electricity being used during the 1740s and 1750s by practitioners in Paris, Montpellier, Geneva, Venice, Turin, Bologna, Leipzig, London, Dorchester, Edinburgh, Shrewsbury, Worcester, Newcastle upon Tyne, Uppsala, Stockholm, Riga, Vienna, Bohemia, and The Hague. The famous French revolutionary and Dr. Jean-Paul Marat, also practitioner of electricity, wrote a book about it titled Mémoire sur l'électricité médicale, Memoir on Medical Electricity. Franklin treated patients with electricity in Philadelphia, so many of them that static electric treatments later became known in the 19th century as Franklinization. John Wesley, the founder of the Methodist Church, published a 72-page tract in 1759 titled Desideratum, or Electricity Made Plain and Useful. He called electricity the noblest medicine yet known in the world. to be used in diseases of the nervous system, skin, blood, respiratory systems, and kidneys. A person standing on the ground, he felt obliged to add, cannot easily kiss an electrified person standing on their horizon. Westlake himself electrified thousands of people at the headquarters of the Methodist movement and at other locations around London. And it wasn't just prominent individuals who were setting up shop. So many non-medical people were buying and renting machines for medical use that London physician James Graham wrote in 1779. I tremble with apprehension for my fellow creatures when I see in almost every street in this great metropolis a barber, a surgeon, a tooth drawer, an apothecary, or a common mechanic turned electrical operator. Since electricity could initiate contractions of the uterus, it became a tacitly understood method of obtaining abortions. Tacitly understood method of obtaining abortions. Francis Lowndes, for example, was a London electrician with an extensive practice who advertised that he treated poor women gratis for amenorrhea. Even farmers began testing electricity on their crops and proposing it as a means of improving agricultural production, as we will see in chapter 6. The use of electricity on living beings in the 18th century was so widespread in Europe and America that a wealth of valuable knowledge was collected about its effects on people, plants, and animals. Knowledge that has been entirely forgotten, that is far more extensive and detailed than what today's doctors are aware of, who see daily but without recognition its effects on the patients and who do not even know such knowledge ever existed. This information is both formal and informal letters from individuals describing the experiences, accounts written up in newspapers and magazines, medical books and treatises, papers read at meetings of scientific societies, and articles published in newly founded scientific journals. As early as the 1740s, 10% of all articles published in the philosophical transactions were related to electricity. And during the last decade of that century, fully 70% of all articles on electricity in the prestigious Latin journal Commentarii de Rubus in Sentis Naturali et Medicina Gestis had to do with its medical uses and its effects on animals and people.